Hi, my name is Benedict. Today's lesson is on mixing drums, getting drums so that they have punch, and also having them work with your bass so that your drums and bass together create this really powerful force. Now, this isn't going to make any real difference whatever style or genre you're working in, whether you want sort of tiny drums inside your mix or whether you want huge drums. One of the things I really noticed was, because I listened to a lot of older music, I grew up with it, was that you can listen to something like Joan Jett's I Love Rock and Roll, or a Slade song, or a Suzi Quatro song, and you feel this immenseness of the mix. All of that glam stuff feels huge. But then if you actually think about it logically, if you go, hang on, let's put aside how I feel about this mix. Sorry, cable annoys me. If I put aside how I feel about this mix and listen to this purely logically, suddenly you realize there's not a lot of bass in there, especially not in modern terms. And a lot of the sounds technically are actually quite small, but somehow it does this. Now, this is exactly what making and mixing music's about. It's about creating illusion. And it's about creating illusion not by creating layers of special effects, like me saying, I work in a fancy studio, therefore, and using a green screen behind myself, because that's just lying. That's not creating illusion. It's just fibbing, filthy fibbing. But within making music, the way we create illusions has a big impact. So let me show you where we start. And then we can end up here. We'll A-B a little bit. Yes, there's a lot more bass in the processed version, but there's also this sense of being quite dynamic. And that's achieved through a couple of processes. And some of those processes run contrary to the way we think it's going to be done. And the way we initially set out, especially when we're first mixing, is often the complete opposite of what we're trying to achieve, and therefore we fail. So let's look at how we might achieve something like this. We go to our DAW and we pull in, or we create, a drum pattern. Now let's just mute our bass. And we get something that sounds like this, and we're kind of like, this has no sexy appeal. There's no fun in this. Oh, before I go much further, why did I choose reggae? Well, I have no real idea. Somehow I ended up deep in the government yard in Trenchtown, not because I'm particularly into reggae or even pretend that this is good reggae. But once you've been listening to the same drum root for a long period of time, sometimes you swap, and somehow I ended up here. That's why reggae, not because I'm pushing reggae or pretending that this is reggae, but that's how it ended up this way. So we start with our drum pattern or loop, and we tend to feel like, this is not cool, this is not nice. And you know what? It isn't. It isn't nice. It isn't cool. It isn't nice. So let's look at what we probably want to do with this. We'll start with EQ. I know everyone's going to go into compression, but I'm actually going to show you how EQ can be a great place to start. Let's pull up our little F2-inator. Actually, it's not there. Sorry, let me reach across and grab this onto the screen. So used to these things all being there, but when they're not, that screen can go off now. Thank you. Now, one of the first things that we might want to do is consider getting rid of what doesn't serve our purpose, but we're not going to do that for the moment. We'll just zero everything. We don't want to come in with too much in the way of preconceived ideas. Turn that off. First thing that we're prone to wanting to do is to grabbing the bass. Yeah, it's got this massive woof to it. But the problem is, as soon as we try and do anything with that, especially when we come to mixdown, is we've got so much level in the woofiness, and we've got so much activity there in what's causing that woofiness, that we're going to find it's very hard to mix anything with it, which is part of why reggae tends to be quite spare, or traditional reggae. But it's just too much, it's too busy. So while we think we've solved a problem, we've actually created a bigger problem than what we've solved. So yes, we might well want some bass. The other problem is that we'll also tend to reach for the treble. While the treble is great because it pulls things forward, and we feel like now we've got everything, when you listen to this, you'll quickly realize it sounds awful. We've got no excitement, none of that leap out that we had in our pre-mixed version. So if we compare this, notice how in that version things do leap out. So be careful with the obvious things that you're prone to wanting to do. Yes, we might well want more bass in this, but let's for the moment assume we're not going to put it in here. Let's look for the interest in this track. Let's say, for argument's sake, we want to bring out those little ghosts. We found them. Great. Now let's clear some of the path. Before we turn up the bass, let's clear some of the top end. You're going to think this is wrong, but it'll make sense in the end. So let's clear some of this away. Notice how far I can pull that treble back, the high end. I can pull that, and this is quite high. I can pull that right back before we really start to feel like we're losing anything there, and yet everything underneath it, so that's in this range here, suddenly starts to become a lot clearer. And this is what we're about. We're looking for clearer. Now let me introduce the rules that I was taught with back in the 80s by an old guy. These were the rules that I was taught with for when you were mixing drums. In particular, your rhythm section. You're looking for, let's get my fingers oriented correctly, we split the frequency into 3 bands. We've got 3 functions that we want. Our kick drum is meant to punch. It's not meant to be a bass. I'm right with deadmau5 there. It's not meant to be a bass. Yeah, that's why I have a bass. It's meant to punch. And so that's quite high. Punch in terms of frequency is really in the 100, 200 kind of arena. It's not in the 40 to 80 arena. That's subs, and most systems won't play them properly. So why you'd want to build a mix out of that, I question. But in terms of punch, which is 100 to 200, low end of your mix, your kick drum wants to punch. You can then have your bass to carry it through time, which is what your bass does. The middle of your drum mix wants to snap. So the snare wants to snap. Punch, snap, punch, snap, punch, snap. That's spearing straight through the mix. Again, go listen to Joan Jett's I Love Rock and Roll, or basically any Suzi Quattro or any Slade, and that's what you're going to hear. It's punch and a snap. And then you've got sizzle. We easily make the mistake of thinking that sizzle is from turning up our high treble. And as we make it infinitely clear and bright and we hear all the little detail that it sizzles. That's not really what happens. Not at all. If you go listen to a steak on a barbecue, it sizzles and it sounds exciting, but most of that activity is going to be here in our frequency range, not up here. So while you can make it seem closer to somebody, like more like faces in the griddle, by increasing the treble, by doing this to it, you're not actually increasing the sizzle per se, because that's happening somewhere here. So you notice that I've actually taken our EQ here, rolled it off a bit, rather than turning it up, because it actually unmasks these frequencies here and gives you a lot more clarity, which is more cut. That's more snap. Here, how as we bring that EQ in with very small moves, we've now got more clarity and more cut. Let's now go with that bass a little bit. We can do this one of two ways. We can use the straight, turn everything up approach, but it makes mud. Or we can use the bell approach, which is doing this. Now you'll notice that I'm doing this without eyes. Now what I'm looking for is punch. I'm not looking for bottom end. You'll see that I bypassed this. Yes. I feel like I've got an enormous pair. But it's not useful because nothing's going to play it back. Whereas if I get up here, somewhere around there, we've got this raw punch. It's here. It's not down here. It's here, and that's what we want. We've got to engage the brain. Which now means I can actually roll off what's underneath that. Hear how that's suddenly become lighter. Our kit has become lighter, and you might think, but that's the exact opposite of what we want. No, remember, we want punch. Our kick drum is for punch. We've got snap and we've got sizzle up top now because we've got a lot more clarity in what's going on. Hear how clear this kit seems. But there's more. And this is one where I see a lot of people don't get it. With our kick drum, especially when we do this, while we think it sounds good, it sounds awful. But there is far too much happening here. We're looking for a punch, just a punch, and that's it. Not a whole lot of inside the mix, because every time the mix does that, we can't really do anything with it. So we're going to want to put quite a narrow cut in here. Again, we'll get rid of them because we're going to do them by ear. So I've got this guy here. Even there. Yuck. So it's almost like we've created, very deliberately, 3 separate parts. Even though we've got one kit, we've got punch, snap, and sizzle. And we've done very little boosting. Messy, clear, And that's a strong punch that we've got there. And we haven't touched any kind of compression. We will look at compression. And for the moment, we will do it. Stop. Before our EQ. Let's pull in. Sorry, let me just thinking. Let's pull in this guy. The old leveling tool. Come here. No. VST are a pain. So, first thing I'm going to do is turn this thing down because the output's far too loud here. It adds a lot of boost. We'll turn off the drive and this high pass here. So, no EQ, just the raw kit sound again. Can you hear how that automatically is starting to achieve what I just did with the EQ? And that's quite deliberate, that we're looking to work out how to create punch, snap, and sizzle in one go. And dynamics processing does exactly that. It's actually tightening up that kick drum. So we've got a lot less whoop. The high end actually reduces because they're little tiny frequencies compared to the larger, more powerful frequencies down below. Therefore, they tend to get rolled off a little bit and we get more of the sizzle. If we're worried that our kick drum is causing too much pumping, I'll show you that. If you listen to that snare, you can kind of hear it. Some of that's because we've just brought our level up so high that all our ghosts are about the same level as our main hit. But there's some nasty pumping there. It's because we're overdoing it and because a lot of the energy is in that kick drum. By using a high-pass filter on the chain that's on the side chain or on the signal that's controlling the actual compressor, then we can let some of that bass through so it doesn't engage the compressor quite as much, and it can let a little bit more of our low end through as we compress heavily. Personally, I think that's ridiculously heavily compressed. Let's try another thing, which is a great way of working with compression and drums. If we put our threshold to as low as possible, we set our ratio to as high as possible, we're just getting this thing to obliterate what we're hearing. But we're not looking to make it sound nice, we're looking for a groove, we're looking for movement. Hear how that moves differently now? You'll feel it. As soon as you hit something that you like, you'll be like, ooh. That's a sign that you found something that works for you, hopefully for the piece, because it's more important that it works for the piece than for you. Once you've hit that point, then you pull up your threshold, and you can cut back your power of processing. So if we bypass this thing, which I don't think it has a bypass switch on board, you're looking for a little bit of movement. After a while, you start to realize, oh, that's quite a lot of movement. But when not super used to it, you're looking for just that little bit of movement. It's like, oh, it moves a bit better. Don't try to do everything in one go. So a little bit more movement in our compressor. Let's bring back in our EQ. Now here how I've lifted up the bottom end. You might think, oh, but I need my kick to be as down as can go. You know, it's to go all the way down to hell, man. But you don't want that because you can't hear it in the mix out in the wide world on the radio. So we've lifted a lot of the stuff that's down here below where it's useful and brought it up so that rather than the kick playing around in the sub area, it gets into the punch area. And that's exactly what we wanted and exactly what we've got. Now listening just to the sizzle, notice how I turned down the treble, but now we've got a clearer treble overall. Little bit of saturation. You don't need a lot. Choose whatever process you want. In one of my last videos, I showed you using very aggressive distortion in a parallel mix to bring up the metalness of the metal in the kit, even though it was synthesized. But you can pull out those frequencies with a little bit of saturation. So drums, improved. We'll now add the bass. It again lacks punch. It's working right down here, but it's not really working. If we put it with our drums, notice how the drums punch nicely, and they're punching pretty hard now, and the bass doesn't seem connected. It's like all over the place, and it's not because our bass player isn't playing in time, because he's MIDI. They're both MIDI. They're both playing in time. So the issue is how we've handled them. Again, we'll go to the extreme with our compression. Now this compressor, when it's not in peak mode, is an RMS mode, which means that it is slower. It'll let the transients through, but I want that so that we get a sense of bite from it. We want to even this out. You might have noticed when this guy's not in, it doesn't feel overly even. Now that's partly from performance. Some notes are meant to be more pushed and more grunty than others, but the problem is, while it's nice and funky, when it's being composed, it's not coming through in the mix. And that's sounding nice. We are getting the difference between the aggressive notes and the less aggressive notes, and it's giving a nice sense of blimp to the notes that we want forward. Now, drive. The drive sound you use is very much going to be up to you. You'll want to go to EQ, but it won't work out. You'll be still like, oh, I'm turning up my bass, and it's like, it doesn't matter what I do, it won't work. You won't get that because we need to reduce it. Again, just as we've taken our kick in particular, but our whole drum kit, and lifted it up into the usable range, so to speak. in that if we're listening on a phone speaker, it's got a usable range of about 1K to 8K. So everything below about 1K is starting to disappear big time. So if you want it to be heard, there's no point putting it here where you want it to be. You've got to put it up here. So drive helps to compress our dynamics and also to compress our frequency range, in part by bringing up the upper half. Play with different spice mixes to find what you want. But with distortion, we're cutting off quite a lot of transient, which is going to even things up. If you've got access to cabinets or anything similar, or as in the last video I did, using very short delays with high resonance or just straight comb filters, you can help build a more unique sense of this sound, and it'll cut through the mix a lot harder, which is what a guitar cabinet is. A speaker, sorry. See how we've got this. We've now changed our profile. We've lifted it up here, which is good. We've moved it up and made it more audible. Done so again even more. We're pushing into that mid-range. So we want to find a way to lift that bass so that it's audible up into the mids. Now what will happen psychoacoustically up in the old noggin is that we will hear the highs, we'll want the lows, so our brain actually tracks its way back down those overtones. So it actually creates undertones, so to speak, from what it can hear. So we've got sort of where we started. All depending upon what you're working in and the result that you want. If we're working in metal, we might well push that high on our low mids. That's about 300. It's often worth choosing a higher frequency, but not one that's going to mess around too much in the vocals or whatever. 2K is the always used to be the official. And that just helps pull it forward. Remember, if the brain can hear an upper harmonic, it'll fill in the rest of them. Down. Doesn't go up anywhere near as well as it goes down. Don't ask me why, it just works that way. Use it. Now, as I added a little bit of saturation to the drums, we might want to do the same with our bass. Now, I've just brought this thing in. I'm not saying that it's right or the only way to do it. I've just brought it into my system to have a listen to it and quite like what it does. What that's doing is it's cutting off a little bit of transient and adding a little bit of saturation, but it's a nice sound. It really is a nice sound. So where a bass sound alone sounds, well, somewhat flat and unlifeless, still, pop this fellow in, and it starts to have a feel to it, like it feels like it could be a real thing. I'm not saying that it sounds like, or it sounds like it's a precision bass or anything, but it just feels like that sound could be real. So we got the pair of them now. Unruly Now you notice how the bass and the drums seem to work together. We've clarified them and we've brought them to working together, but we can do that even more. The first obvious thing that we might do to them is compress the two of them together, which is referred to as glue compressing. And what that does is it's about taking the transients and then just reducing everything. So both the kick, or mostly the kick and the bass together, so that they feel like they groove together. Again, we'll go brutal. Now we're looking for groove. To some extent we want punch here. So we don't want to hack things off too fast. You see here, it's yuck. I mean, it's kind of nice on the side stick, but it's yuck overall. Feels like I'm starting to get some groove there. Listening to the whole thing, not just the kick and the bass. It's very easy to listen to only the kick and the bass and ignore everything else, but you're listening to an overall sense of groove. When does this start to... And once you've got that, then you've got it right. So we can raise our threshold again. We're really only looking for a couple of dB of compression there. We're not looking to dig into this. We're just looking for a couple of dB just to tell the brain these things are working together. They are one. And by being one, they suddenly get this enhanced punch. We've given each instrument punch. Now we can make them punch together. But there are more things that we can do that help glue things together. We can EQ together. In this case, we're adding a boost. It's at 65, so that's right down where we want it. Actually, we'll kill these ones off for the moment. Because it's a reggae type thing, we do want to feel like there's all that there, and we have cleared a lot of it away. But this means that by using a bell, so again doing the... See, even here, 90, that's looking, that's gorgeous. So let's give ourselves a bit of... That's good. Rather than boosting down here, which if your studio speakers can reproduce it, it's nice, but it's pointless. We're better off going high. And that's given this huge punch and feeling of low end to the kick and bass combo. That doesn't sound so great. So that tells us that there's probably something we want to clear away. We're going to do exactly what we did before. We're going to separate out so that we've got punch, snap, and sizzle. We know that this is undoing some of our punch, that sound that you're hearing there. Now I know we built up a lot of stuff on our bass in around 300. Now we seem to be getting rid of it. But by doing both the kick and the bass as a pair, as a bus, then we're gluing them together more because this EQ is practicing on both of them together. So it's acting on the together sound, not on the separate sounds. So we might make a move in one that we know we're going to partially undo in another, but that's going to create a lot of interest. Now in reggae, where the snares are used like that, it's a great sound. It's just a wonderful sound. I'm not sure whether they're hitting the side and the snare at the same time. Whatever they do, it's brilliant, and it's part of the trope in older reggae that there'd be a lot of and then and it's quite a metallic sound. As I say, I kind of get the impression maybe they're hitting the side, the rim, as well as the head. The drummer might be able to tell me, don't care, but we want to find that and pull that out because that's our snap. And when it does happen, you're held and then suddenly it does that. And you're like, oh. So that's our snap. Again, tempting to go like this. Oh, there's my sizzle. No, it's not, because it's just all over the place. We've got to pick where we want that to be. Here we can drop all of that and it still sounds nice. So let's roll a noticeable bit off. Not that we're going to notice it. Here it suddenly sounds punchier. We've reduced where our instrument's really working. So we've actually kind of done a frequency compression by saying, rather than asking you to listen to all of this, we're now asking you to listen to this. And because you're only listening to this, it's more powerful. That's why when you're looking to stab somebody, you don't stab them with an object that's this round, because it's not going to go in. You stab them with something that's really pointy, because it'll go in. So we've made our sounds more pointy. Again, specifically punch, snap, and sizzle. More pointy. What did you notice there? That treble that I rolled off seems to come back. But it comes back with more sparkle than was there. If I were to take this, it sounds kind of flat. Yeah, it's brighter, but it's kind of flat. Take that back where it was, give or take. A little bit of the old tape saturation, no compression, bright as we can go, no other EQ. Suddenly we've got all that extra brightness, which has increased the brightness on the top of our kick, which pulls it through, gives it even more punch. Obviously the snap and the sizzle are now enhanced as well. And the thing we haven't done yet is reverb. Reverb's really important. Reverb's really important in every form of music. And I know I hear a lot of mixes these days where reverb is not there. Don't do it. Absolutely don't do it. Commercial records, many have not enough reverb in my opinion, but at least they have it. I hear a lot of people in their backyard, so to speak, and they're afraid of reverb because they're like, oh, but it's, you know, it's not cool, man. And it's like, yeah, it's even less cool to not use it. Use it, control it. Decide how you're going to do it. But if you choose not to put your piece into a scene, into a room of some kind, then you're just saying to people, creepy. So, there are several that I prepared earlier. Actually, no, they're not there. I've taken them out. But here's one I prepared earlier. Just in case you're wondering what it is, it's one I made myself out of my own devices. It's my own modulating delay, using its breakout feature to go through my own echo nest. And that gives us a real blooming room, a room that blooms, which is rather than going, it goes, And that works really nicely in this sort of situation because it's clearer for the beginning of the sound, like a pre-delay, where you've got your snap of your snare and then your reverb starts a little bit after it, which gives you more clarity on your snare. And this actually rises and gets thicker. And because reggae is very open, and then of course when we get to this cool snare bit, hear how those snares really take to that room. In this case, there's a lot of early reflection, so you can hear, especially in these things, you can hear all those taps rattling just behind the kit in time, and that's great. Outside of the cans, we won't hear them anywhere near as clearly, but that gives us this clear sense of the room that it's being in. So your reverb. Really important. I will often put the reverb on first. Once I've started working on my piece and I've decided what room it's going to live in, and I build my piece then inside that room, then I would have been doing all this drum processing inside the room. But it's much easier for you to hear before we put the reverb in. But if we turned off this processing, let's get rid of all these things, and you might think, geez, that's an awful lot. And yeah, it kind of is. But this is how it's done. And it's just so messy. Really messy. And we'll push it back in again. The force of the focused clarity of the punch, the snap, and the sizzle means that the room can come alive and make the most of that without all that extra bleh that we actually don't want to hear. We could almost look at it as being we've taken our EQ and chopped and chopped. It's not what we've done, but it's kind of what we've done. And so we can actually work things harder. This can sit lower in the mix and still punch through and still spear through. Now, if you listen to old mixes from the 70s, Rod Stewart, you're not hearing massively loud drum kits, but you're very aware of that they're there and what they're doing. And that's because of this, because they're mixed high and low, so they're compressed in terms of frequency so that they just punch. Again, to go back to Mr. Mass, Mr. Dead Mass said, your kick is a kick and it's not a bass. I know some people have been all boo-hoo about it, but, you know, it's Dead Mass. He's earned his right to be there, and he's definitely earned his right to have an opinion about it. And he is right, so that your kick is there to create punch. If you want to have a bass that's doing the same thing, go for it. If you want to treat your kick like it's a bass, go for it. But then it's really a bass with a thump on the beginning of it. You haven't invented anything new. You're just doing the same thing a slightly different way. Good on you. Great. But don't get boo-hoo because your kick wants to have punch. And that's exactly what this has done. He's talking about the same thing. We're talking about the same thing. It's the same thing that Rod Stewart was doing back in the 70s because that's what everybody did because it works. So this is a way. If you think, I don't want to do all this processing, you don't have to. You absolutely don't have to. You won't get the same results, but you don't have to. If we're to take just this together process, that alone goes a certain way towards achieving what we wanted to do. So if you feel like, oh, I don't want to do all of that work, maybe it's better you hire a mix engineer, but otherwise, then look at just being very aggressive. Something sounds a bit wrong there to me. We've just lost too much bass is all, I think. Don't know. But you can achieve part of the result if you do part of the work. If you're going to do part of the work, don't do it only on the kick and not the bass, or only the bass and not the kick. Sorry, the drums, because it won't work. You need to do it on the pair of them together, and they will process a little differently, and you will find it harder because you've got all the evils that were in that drum sample and the difficulties that you have in your bass, and then you're trying to solve them together, which is fine, but you'll find that you don't end up with the clarity of punch that we had when we'd separated them, worked them to be what they needed to be, same again, put them together, and then added that little bit extra, which is like, oh, where they really come together. Now, if you have any questions, ask down below. It is a big topic, and it is one that you will need to really take some time practicing. So get yourself a drum performance, preferably a reasonable one, preferably one without too much room in it. If you are on the Reason platform, then some of the studio kits, like the Nailed, the very first one from the Rex, will do. Otherwise, the Melder drum kits, they're fine to work with. Just set up your loop and introduce your processes and really play with them. Play with them hard, so that you're listening to that EQ and going, this is what I'm achieving here, this is what I'm achieving here. You are not looking to create huge amounts of if you need that in your mix. That's why God invented sub-bass instruments, not kick drums. You can introduce that back in another way and then be in control of it. So really spend hours just listening to it, getting that sense of this is what I'm doing. And once you get it, then you'll be like, oh, now I know how to do it. Until you get it, it's going to seem a little infuriating. So, questions? Ask down below. If you're looking to hire me to make your mixes for you, because I think of proving I know how to do it, talk to me down below or pop onto my website. And I've got a form. It is a big form that you can fill in there, either from the main page or the production page, or go to Air Gigs or somewhere like that and track me down and talk to me through there. Same. Have a good day. Enjoy what you're doing.